Much debate has gone on over the years on which home console had the best Street Fighter port. Nintendo fanboys will promise you it's the SNES, and the Sega guys will swear on the Genesis. Well, today we're going to take a look at the Street Fighter II series on the Sega Genesis. While the Super Nintendo got its first Street Fighter release in August of 1992, Sega fans had to wait over a year later for a release on the Genesis. Capcom released Street Fighter II Special Championship Edition in October of 1993. The game almost mirrored Street Fighter II Turbo, which was released on the SNES just a few months earlier. The game has the same hyper-fighting feature that Street Fighter II Turbo had, where the level of stars you select determine the speed of the game. This is a great feature as the default game runs a little too slow for my liking. But at its full 10 stars, it's honestly almost unplayable for me. My reaction timing just isn't that good. I find 4 or 5 stars is perfect. In Special Championship Edition, you can now select from the 4 bosses that were previously unplayable. It doesn't seem like much now, but back in the early 90s, this was really exciting stuff, especially if you were a Street Fighter junkie like I was. Also new to the game, every fighter has multiple colored attires to select from by choosing the character with either the attack or start button. A lot of the fighters receive new moves, like Dalsim now being able to teleport and Chun-Li having a fireball. Also, the player select screen received an update with a few redrawn faces that look less cartoonish than Street Fighter II. Overall, not a whole lot was done over the first Street Fighter II installment, but that didn't matter a whole lot to Genesis owners, seeing as this was the first title in the series released for their console. Now this is where it gets tricky. Trying to be fair about my opinions of the game, as this is a sensitive subject to some of you. I'd like to think I played an equal part in the Sega versus Nintendo rivalry. I owned both the SNES and Genesis as a kid, and both had their goods and bads, but I have to say I think this game looks slightly better on the Super Nintendo. Not by much, but mainly the backgrounds. The colors on the Genesis just seem to be off slightly on some of the levels. Something just doesn't look quite right. But the player sprites look great and everything runs and feels very smooth. The sound is what's to be expected from the Genesis. Some people argue it had superior sound, but honestly, it's all a matter of opinion. I feel when done right, the Genesis has sounded amazing, like in the Sonic games, but I've also heard plenty of games that make me want to mute my TV. As for this game, the sounds are all there, they all work, but the voices lack any clarity. And the music is actually impressive for the system. It's obviously not as good as the arcade, but they did a good job working it over to the Genesis. Really though, what's the most important part about a fighting game? Playability. This version has plenty of that. That is though, if you have the 6-button controller. That's right, remember Sega Genesis only had a 3-button controller by default, so where are 6 attack commands gonna go? Well, you start the match with A, B, and C as your low, medium, and high punches, and you have to hit the start button to toggle over to kicks. That could slow down even the best fighter, and I couldn't imagine having to play the game like that. Luckily, Sega released a 6-button controller. In fact, I think they released it strictly because of this game. And if you have that controller, you'll realize this game plays really good on the Genesis. The D-pad feels great, the buttons are responsive and close together, and no damn shoulder buttons to worry about. This game is easy if you want it to be, but man is it challenging at the highest difficulty. Some matches I couldn't even get one hit in. The opponents are just absolutely relentless and cheap as hell to boot. They'll drop special after special on you faster than a human opponent could even dream of. All in all, the first installment on the Genesis was pretty impressive. Yeah, the sound wasn't top-notch, and some people feel the graphics weren't as good as the SNES, but the gameplay was great, and that's really what we're looking for as fighting game fans. In June of 1994, the Genesis and Super Nintendo both saw a new Street Fighter installment in Super Street Fighter II: The New Challengers. With the addition of 4 all-new fighters, this was the biggest update to the game since the original Street Fighter II. The game features 16 playable characters, including the new fighters T-Hawk, Fei Long, DJ, and Cammy. All pretty interesting additions with good backgrounds and stories that accompany them. There's actually a lot of good new stuff here in the game. The player select screen was completely revamped with incredible new face art. All the announcer voiceovers were redone, but I gotta be honest, the guy kinda sounds like a fruitcake. And why in the hell did they revoice Guile's Sonic Boom Attack? I mean, he sounds like an AM radio morning show DJ. What's with that? Why does Guile sound like that? He's supposed to be a badass American hero. Why did he go from to... That's probably the only addition in SSF2 that really bothers me. Also included are some new moves. Well, kind of. Ryu now has the ability to shoot a red fireball, which causes your opponent to burst into flames, and Ken now has a flaming uppercut, which also does the same. Chun-Li's fireball attack was also reanimated, from her stance to the actual appearance of the fireball itself. Each fighter now has 8 color schemes. Yes, 8. That's a little on the excessive side, especially since they changed the color of people's hair and skin tones. I mean, I like options too, but I don't need Ken in a bright green karate gi. Every level design was redone in one way or another. Some feature simple color changes, and others feature big changes like Ken's stage receiving a newer model boat and younger looking people in the background. The stages for the new fighters look absolutely incredible and really bring the characters to life. Not to mention the great new themes for each of these levels, which brings us to the sounds department. Again, I feel the SNES has an advantage for sound quality. The music doesn't have as much depth here on the Genesis, and the clarity just isn't there on the sound effects, but overall it still sounds good. And one thing the Genesis had that the SNES didn't was the ability to continue playing the music between rounds. The gameplay doesn't really differ much from Special Championship Edition. It still feels great, as long as you have the 6-button controller. And it feels like the difficulty was dumbed down slightly, which isn't bad as the last game was tough as nails. The game is simply fun to play, and you can see why it was such a success. I mean, this is the game that started the whole fighting game craze. What it all boils down to is, I'm a Street Fighter fan. It doesn't matter what console I'm playing it on. I feel the game looks and sounds a little better on the SNES, but the playability is a little better here on the Genesis. There's no reason not to own both. I mean, these games aren't exactly rare, but they are worth every penny.
9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Sonic Boom!